Welcome to the Leafy podcast, helping real estate investors and entrepreneurs grow.
Let's start the show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leafy Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a really awesome guest that we're going to be talking to, so very exciting show. I've got Jennifer Gregorich and Brian Price on the line here today as our hosts, and so I'm going to go ahead and just hand it over to them so they can get us started.
Well, today we're talking to an author, a speaker, an advisor, and a former business broker who says that it took him 10 years to unlearn what he was taught in business school. So after a career in advertising sales, he started businesses including a commercial debt brokerage, and he helped to finance small and medium-sized businesses, and that led him to the field of business brokerage. And over several years, he sold dozens of businesses for others while also managing his own portfolio of income properties and starting his career as a local private investor. So right now he is a private transaction advisor with people all around the world who are wanting to buy or sell their business. So let's give it up to someone we have a lot of questions for, which is David Barnett. Welcome, David.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
David.
Well, we're excited.
I read your full bio too. It was a lot here. You definitely have been through a lot. And so one of the things that stood out to me is you said that, when you went through business school is it didn't prepare you for small businesses and managing them. I think that's a good place for us to start, because I know we like to do small businesses, and I know most people are a small business. So I think that'd be a great place to start. What are the things you learned?
I've seen different statistics, and it's something like over 90% of all the businesses are the smallest ones, right? The big businesses, they're few and far between, and they're important too. But I think when I was in business school, I went there thinking that I would be made into a businessman by going to business school. And around year 3, I realized they were trying to turn me into a Fortune 500 bureaucrat, some kind of middle manager in a big mechanism for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And when you're sitting there doing case studies about whether General Electric should expand into yet another foreign market, and you realize, wow, when I get out into the real world, I'm probably never going to be in a business that's going to be debating whether or not to open a branch plant on the other side of the world. I'm going to be in much smaller enterprises. I began to wonder, is this stuff really applicable to me? And when I got out into the real world, the best education I ever had is I got a job with the Yellow Pages. Do you remember them?
Oh yeah.
Actually,
back in the day.
they're still around and kicking. They're a little bit more digital and redone because we're on the Yellow Pages. We just got a call from them. So
I spent 7 years working for them, and I was a premise rep. So I was outside sales. So I would actually be in different markets, and I would go and visit the owners and managers of these everyday Main Street businesses, as I call them now. And so I got to speak with those people, understand their business model, and understand what kind of customers they wanted, and who they most wanted to either walk through the door or call them on the phone back in those days. And I was there at just the right time, because in the late 90s, Google was around, but if you typed plumber into Google, you would get a guy in California, no matter where in the world you were, because they hadn't figured out local searching yet. And so when people
have been on Google then,
when people needed, the plumber because their pipes were broken in their house, they needed a guy who was, within a 10-minute drive, right?
Yeah.
And so it was still a really vital and important medium back then for advertising. And so I was in there right at the right time.
That's cool.
That is cool. I still think, though, that people crave that, and they still aren't really getting what they need with that, even with local search, because with your phone or everything else, and I'm very social media, whatever friendly and all that, but you still have to really kind of dig through that. You can go through 2 pages of sponsored ads now before you get to a local person.
And what's funny is that when I was at Yellow Pages, we had a lot of research. And one of the neat things that we learned is that people's purchasing habits were formed when they went from that sort of late teenage to early adult period of time, kind of when you go out on your own and you have to start doing for yourself and fending for yourself. And if you learn to start looking things up in the Yellow Pages, then it took a long time to get out of that habit. And what's funny is that I know a fellow who's he's got maid service business, so house cleaning, and they actually tried the Yellow Pages and they found that it's still effective for a certain demographic. Of elderly people, they're still reaching for the book first because their habits in making purchase decisions haven't changed.
Interesting.
Yeah. That is very interesting. So how did you make a transition from that to working at the Yellow Pages to like what you're doing now? Like that's a whole lot of stuff had to happen.
Well, I had more faith in Google than a lot of other people did. I knew that they would figure out what they were doing. And so it was pretty clear to see that the future of this printed book was limited. So I began to realize that I did need to do something different. And I had always had an entrepreneurial streak within me, and I wanted to get out and do something on my own. And so I explored different ideas and looked at a couple of franchise concepts and things like this. And we ended up starting a business with a partner. And that's when I left Yellow Pages. And I ran that business for a little over a year and a half when the opportunity came up to sell it. And I had no idea how to sell a business at that point. And I was very fortunate that we did a deal with someone who was a stand-up, honorable guy. So we did the deal and we got paid everything we were supposed to. But after learning what I know now, in looking back at that deal, we had left ourselves open to all kinds of opportunity to be taken advantage of. And luckily we weren't. And so I did that. And one of the reasons why I sold the business is that we were dealing with homeowners. And I really started to miss those business owners and managers that I was dealing with when I was with the Yellow Pages. And so I knew that my heart was really in talking to that kind of person. And so I went looking for something else to do where I'd be back sitting across from those people. And that's when I got into financing commercial debt and leasing arrangements. So I actually took a training program from a California company who taught me that business, how to do proper funding packages and things like this. And I hung out a shingle, as they say, and I opened up an office. And I started to work with people who primarily had been told no by their banker for getting additional funds for expanding their business or growing their business. But while I was doing that, I started to meet people who were looking for money to buy an already existing business. And I started to notice a certain trend with those people. In the fall of 2008, remember the big Great Recession that we had then?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what happened for me in that recession is that a lot of the funding sources I was using to get capital for my small business clients, they went under because they were packaging up loans in that, if you recall the term asset-backed commercial paper, all of a sudden nobody wanted to buy that stuff. And so these guys started to fall like crazy. I remember over a dozen of them went out of business just in the fall of 2008.
Wow.
And I said, I got to make a pivot here because my pipeline's drying up. My sources where I can take people are drying up. And I realized that there was a big void in my area for business brokerage because what I consistently saw with these people that were looking for money to buy a business is that the deals were put together in a really amateur way. So they were going to people like real estate agents, sometimes attorneys or accountants that really didn't have a lot of experience in that. And the deals weren't put together correctly. The valuations were way off, or people would enter into agreements without proper wording. They would lose deposits, things of this nature. And I said, there's an opportunity here for someone who can do this right. So I joined up with a big international franchise brand name. And the reason I chose them is because they gave me access to training. And so over the next 2.5 years, I started working as a business broker while attending these big week-long workshop seminars where I was doing courses that ultimately ended in me becoming certified as a business broker. And I was the first person here where I live to have that certification, even though it had been around for 40 years.
Wow.
So that over that period of time when I was a business broker, that it was about 3 years, I sold 36 businesses for other people. And by any measure that you can look at, I was probably one of the most successful business brokers around. And I can tell you that business sucks because it's like real estate. You get paid when something is sold. But the difference with businesses is that sometimes it takes a year or more to convince a business owner to list with you. And then it can take years to sell. So one of the first businesses I listed was the last business I sold. So it had been on my books for 36 months. And I remember the guy wrote me my commission check, which was a high 5-figure check. And he said, wow, look at you. You earned this amount of money today. And I said, look, it was a fried chicken franchise. I said, the person who works at your front counter has earned more money since I've known you.
Right.
It's taken me 3 years to get this check.
Yeah.
And there was such a cash flow roller coaster. I remember 1 year, 9 months without a closing. So I was paying for my office, my assistant, my ad programs, everything, and no money was coming in.
Wow.
And so I had a young family at the time. My kids are 10 and 11 now, so they were just 3 and 4 years old back then. And I wasn't able to create, a family household budget because my cash flow was so erratic. And I said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. So I left the industry. I actually became a banker. And so I was working with a bank, and I had a regional territory where I was calling on mid-sized companies, and spent a lot of time in my car, and my phone would ring, and it would be people that had been given my name, and they would say, Dave, I'm trying to sell my business, or I'm trying to buy a business. I was told that you can help me. And I would often say, no, I don't do that anymore. I'm not the guy anymore. Until one day, a fellow named Bob called me, who I had met when I had my office opened. And he said, Dave, I need your help. I found this business. I want to buy it. My lawyer and my accountant keep telling me what I need to get out of the deal, but they can't really help me with the negotiation, how to get through this. I need someone like you. And I said, Bob, I can help you, but I have a full-time job. Maybe I could work as a consultant, bill you by the hour, but it can't be during business hours. And he just said, great. What's your address? I'll come over on Saturday. And that was the beginning of this little side hustle where people were calling me looking for help, and I would help them with the knowledge I had built up as a business broker, but using it in a completely different way. And so that's why I chose the term private transaction advisor. That little side hustle grew over the years, and after about 2 years of doing that on the side, I started to bill more to clients than I was earning from my job. So I gave up the role at the bank and started doing it full time. And that's when the books started to come out, and the YouTube channel. And when you're a business broker, you have an agency relationship. So that's governed by a lot of law. And so there's licensing in most jurisdictions. But when you're simply advising someone as a consultant, then you're kind of outside of all of that. And so because I don't have any kind of fees that are based on the outcome of buying or selling the business, or based as a percentage of what that deal is, I'm not in any kind of agency capacity, so I can work with people all over. And what has happened is, because of YouTube and the books over the course of time, I've gone from someone who just does business here where I live to helping people all over the place. And really, I heard a term a little while ago, Anglosphere, kind of UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA. My clients come from all over there. And because the countries have a similar enough legal tradition, I'm able to help people and advise people. And of course, at the end of the day, it's local CPAs and attorneys are people who have to be a part of the team.
That's very interesting. And your journey is, I understand that quite well, because I was doing headhunting and recruiting at one point. And I was only headhunting and recruiting. I went from healthcare, but only like the directors of physical therapy and occupational therapy, to engineers, only at a certain high capacity, thing. But even then, that's a 6 month some odd process. I mean, you're working with someone and they can go on the interview and they want it. And then at the very last minute, their kid has a meltdown. I just can't leave my boyfriend, and everything falls through, and they're the perfect candidate. And you're just like, boom, right? This is the worst, because you've spent so much money and time and effort, talking to them, trying to make sure it's all okay. And it's also interesting because in that same industry, they have what they call the double funnel. And I'm going to just show you, because this is really where you're at right now, right? Hold on. You're just going to love
While
this,
she's
right?
drawing.
No, anyway, well, you can't see it. But anyway, so on one side, you start out trying to help all these people, but only in your area, right? So you're killing yourself doing all this stuff, but it's in your local area. And that's how most people start with staffing. They're going to give everyone in Timbuktu any person they need, from a secretary to the plant manager, right? But when you really make a lot of money, when you're at the top of your game, is when you provide carbon black plant managers with 20 years of experience.
Yeah, very niche stuff.
Very niche, and you do it all over the world. So that's kind of like, I can see how your progression went from one to the other. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And it's funny because I think you have to take that journey, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
You have to build yourself up from that first experience in order to make it to the next place and be able to deliver value there.
Yeah, because the Yellow Pages guy can't be a consultant that understands both sides of a deal in order to consult and say, okay, I know what the business is going through, and I know what the buyer of the business is going through. So you had to go through all of that and get certified with that to get all that knowledge. And you didn't know it at the time, but everything, if you have clarity of purpose and you're continually just working on being the best you can at what you're doing with an eye open to, am I aligned with right in this space and time, then it's amazing how the pavers just go right in front of you so you can march up a clear path.
Yeah. And as I've been going along this path, it's amazing how, when I reflect back, I used to have a lot of people come into my business brokerage office, and they were business owners or buyers, and they would ask me a lot, and I would teach them a lot. And in that business model, educating people and giving them information was just part of how you prepared someone to buy or sell. And the money was earned in the transaction. And then I would become very upset when I learned later that those people had gone off and done a deal on their own. And what it has since taught me is that I realized the market was trying to tell me that there was an appetite and a demand for a different kind of help. Those people wanted that education, they wanted that training and information, and they came to me to get it. There was a room for a business model that was just based upon helping those people by teaching them what they wanted to know. And that's what I do today. So it's kind of neat. It's almost like, I cleaned out my ears and I could finally hear what the market was trying to say.
Rather than become resentful.
Yeah.
See, you were mad at first and resentful, but instead you turn that frown upside down. Some people would have said, man, everyone just screws me over. And that would be like the end of that, right? I just get screwed over, rather than think, well, wait a minute, would they have paid me for what I did give them? Because it was of so much value. Let me try that. That is a very different sort of approach to things. That and if anyone is listening, I always look at my mic but nobody can see, it's right here. If anyone is listening, when we talk about mindset, this isn't this woo 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 thing up in the universe, where you have to meditate 18 hours a day in a Himalayan salt cave, right? This is just the idea of trying to approach resentments or even negative things differently and saying, okay, I feel really terrible right now. Let me turn this around, and is there anything I can learn from it? Sometimes you can't, right? Well, then discard it, move on. But sometimes like this, you can. And look, it's a whole different career, and he's smiling and happy, and you're a bestseller with how many of these books? What, 6 books, 6 Amazon bestselling books?
There 3 of them were Amazon bestsellers. I got 6 books out there, and there's a new one coming out at the end of October. And it's funny what you say about mindset, because I listened to a podcast the other day, and it was psychologists and different people that do research were talking about it, and they believe that the scarcity mindset actually comes out of our history. And if you think about a time in history where we were living in small bands, and you might have had a small area to graze your sheep or to go hunting or whatnot, if people encroached on that territory, it might mean that you don't eat. And so you were really protective of that turf. And that kind of mentality worked really well back then. You kept people off your land, right? But nowadays, I mean, I'm selling a product. There's 7 billion people on Earth. I just mentioned to you the top, big English-speaking countries where I do a lot of business. There's 500 million people in those countries. I mean, there's more than enough room for another 100 people like me, and for me still to have a fantastic business. And
well, there you go. People get all of his books and be the next him.
so it's like, it's hard not to have an abundant mindset when you just realize how much opportunity exists out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that people know that just because they fail at one thing doesn't mean it's it's always going to be that way too. I think we have a bit of a permanence when it comes to failure as well. And so everybody's so worried about losing or, scarcity, is that it becomes such a thing that they never start at in the beginning. And so I think your story is great when it comes to the what you've gone through is actually what added to what you do now. And, you wouldn't be as successful if you hadn't gone through those hardships.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. And talking about failure and learning from failure, do you want to know a really interesting statistic?
Yes.
When I had my business brokerage office, we had a seller intake questionnaire. So business owners would come in to list their business for sale, and we make them fill in this questionnaire, basic information. And all of these people had successful money-making businesses. Otherwise, I wouldn't even meet with them, right? Mm-hmm. They had something that someone was going to want to buy. And one of the questions on the questionnaire is, have you ever gone bankrupt? Mm. Almost 40% checked yes.
Wow.
So these are people who owned successful, profitable businesses, but at some point in their past, when they were still on their learning journey, they had gone through a pretty dramatic upset that led to having to go bankrupt. Yet here they were, many years later at the head of a successful business, ready to move on to the next thing. And so a lot of people though may have had a hardship like that and then just gotten a job somewhere and kept their tail tucked between their legs for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. But you can learn from these things, and it can make you a better person and a better business person, certainly, especially after, you learn the rules of your industry or trade a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, when it comes to people have like 3 failed businesses before they actually create a successful one as well. As I've heard that statistic as well.
And there's different degrees of failure. There's a lot of people out there who have a business, because I would meet these people because they would try to sell. They would come to me because they wanted to get out. They wanted to see if I could sell their business. And there are people out there that are working full time, but they're not taking a big enough paycheck as they could get if they worked for somebody else. Mm-hmm. And when you're not being paid the market rate for what your labor is worth, it means you're contributing time to make the business operate. And if you're donating your time into something, it's not actually a business. We have a different word for that. We call it a hobby. Mm-hmm. Right? And so there are people out there that are putting their time into things, trying to make it work. There are people out there who are getting by, earning just what they would if they worked for somebody else. And so I don't call that a business either. I call it a job.
Yeah.
And then you have to be able to pay yourself what you would earn doing this work for somebody else. And then there has to be something more, something for the investor. I always, when I'm doing presentations and talking to people who might want to buy a business, I always say you're wearing 2 different hats. Usually when you buy a business, you're wearing an investor hat and a job seeker hat. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the times when you buy a business, you're going to end up being the person who runs the business. And as the new manager of the business, you need to get the right paycheck for that. But as the investor in purchasing the business, you need to get a return on your investment. And that's a different part of the equation. Mm-hmm. And so, while 40% of the people who came to me to sell a good business had gone bankrupt, many of those other ones who had never gone bankrupt have probably had other experiences like those, where they weren't earning enough, the business didn't function well enough, they ended up closing it down. They never went bankrupt, but they still had to take their hard knocks in order to get to the place where they were finally successful.
Pretty sure that's not probably all of them. Like I've never talked to anyone who amounted to anything of success who got it right the first out of the gate. And it's amazing how many people who do get it right first out of the gate end up failing miserably after a certain amount of time because of some bit of knowledge or something that they really needed. And then they splat and then they pick themselves up and they're like, man, it was going so good. And then they learn from that and then they move forward again.
Well, there's a bias called survivorship bias, where if you are successful at something, oftentimes you don't really appreciate how much timing, good luck, a good connection, etc., played in your success. Mm-hmm. And so when you look back at what you did, you tend to say, "Oh, it's because I worked hard and had a good attitude." Right? I had a great idea. And you hear people like that talking, right? These successful examples of entrepreneurs or even athletes or people in different, places where they'll talk about what it took for them to be successful, but it's not the full picture.
Yeah.
Because they don't, from within the frame, they can't see what's that expression? You can't see the forest for the trees or whatever.
Forest for the trees.
From their perspective, they haven't seen everything that really went into the success.
Yeah. And then they get mad, like you're trying to knock them, for being but that's not it either. There's a full picture for it too. So you have to looking at the big picture is kind of hard, especially if you have a bias or a filter that you're looking through it for. One big thing that's happening this weekend here in my town, in fact, I'm going to attend it tomorrow, is the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston. We have the Franchise Expo. So there is going to be this massive franchise expo, and I see that you've written on that and talked about that. Do you have any word of advice for anyone who might be listening that might be interested in a franchise that might go through that? Because I know we're going to.
Yeah, I've got a whole bunch. In fact, I wrote a book in 2015 called Franchise Warnings because I started to see things happen again and again in the world of franchises. Mm-hmm. And when I went looking for more information or books about it, what I found is that there were almost no books about the dangers of franchises. There were lots of books on how to choose one. And this is one of the problems, is that when it comes to franchises, there are a lot of fingers in the cookie jar. So there's a whole industry of franchising, and they have an industry association. And then there are business brokers and franchise brokers. And all of these people make money when somebody decides to invest in a franchise. Right. So don't expect to hear much criticism of that business model, because everybody earns money through this business model. And when you get into a franchise situation, one of the things I love to say is that you don't actually buy a business, you lease it. Mm-hmm. Because you don't own the name, you don't own the intellectual property, you don't own the policies and procedures. I was talking yesterday with a guy who just gone through a franchise disclosure document. It actually said in there that the franchisor owned the customers, his phone numbers, and his email addresses. So if he ever backed out or decided to quit, they had a legal right to everything that his business would require for somebody else to run it. Mm-hmm. Right. And I have seen too many times people get into a situation where they invest a lot of money to build up a business, a franchise, and then it doesn't work. And because of the way these different agreements are written, the franchisor basically gets to take over the business. It happens a lot in restaurants where the franchisor will negotiate a master lease and then sublet to the franchisee. And if that franchisee borrows a ton of money to build out a new location and then fails because they can't make the payments on that loan or they don't have enough sales, etc., because the franchisor is the master tenant, they can foreclose on the franchisee. They can change the keys. They can lock the door. They can then go to the bank that lent the money to build the location and say, look, you've got your property in our location. And then they can give them a time limit. They can say, you have a week to get all your stuff out of here. Well, what's a bank going to do? Right? Yeah. They say, okay, well, we'll sell it to you at 10 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. Now the franchisor is in control of a brand new location that somebody put hundreds of thousands of dollars into. They pick it up for pennies on the dollar.
Wow.
And then what do you think they do with it?
They just put somebody else right into it, and then they get a turnkey property. They get a turnkey thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So the first person gets messed up, and the next person's like, hey, this is cool. I love this franchise.
Well, the first person might have put $500,000 into it, and then the next person gets it for $100,000.
Yeah.
And now maybe it can make money.
Right, because they don't have crushing debt that they have to owe.
Have the same overhead, right?
Okay. Wow, I never even knew that.
Yeah.
Well, that's scary. Yeah.
Here's the other thing that comes up again and again. So if they talk about the greater success rates in franchises versus independent businesses. You and I can buy some squeegees, pails, and get some business cards printed, and we're in business, washing windows, right? So the barrier to getting into business, period, is very low. $100, you're in business doing something, right? But to get into a franchise, you have to have significantly better resources.
Yes.
And so what I have observed is that when somebody opens a new franchise business, they're going to have all the same troubles as somebody in an independent business, But because they typically are a person with greater resources, they can afford to last longer. Okay. And one of the things that happens quite often is you have to sign a 5-year lease for a commercial space if you have any kind of physical location for your business. So oftentimes there's a personal guarantee there, right? So you could open a franchise, put it into a leased location, sign a lease with the landlord with your personal guarantee. You may never, ever actually be profitable in the franchise. But if you break the lease and move out and close the store, the landlord could sue you for the balance of rent until the end of the lease.
Wow.
So sometimes it makes more sense to keep propping up an unprofitable business than it does to close it and break your covenant with the landlord. And so what, they'll often use statistics like we have this many % of our businesses are still operating after 5 years. And my question is, I want to know how many are still open after 6.
Yes.
How many people have renewed the lease? Because if they're not doing well, that's the moment they'll close. When they'll just give the landlord the notice, we're not renewing the lease. They'll move their stuff out, and then they can shut down without being afraid of being sued by the landlord. So there's all kinds of things that people need to be aware of and questions they have to ask. And that's why I wrote the book.
And that's important. I'm going to add in, we always got to show what we do here. But if you set up your entity correct, like if you were coming through us, we would say, now be sure you're not signing anything in your own name. You need to be able to have an entity and a structure underneath that entity so that you're signing it under this one specific entity name that is not tied to you personally, your real estate, your cars, your kids, whatever. Because a lot of people just sign their name right to it, and there you have it. That's, now all of a sudden you personally are on the hook for a lot of stuff, even though it's another business. And franchises now will state, go and open up an LLC, whatever. But if you just open one up underneath your name, there's no anonymity or anything else. What's the difference?
Well, but here's the thing is they'll tell you to set up a legal entity for liability and tax purposes, but then they'll turn around and want you to personally guarantee the franchise agreement. So they very often will ask you to sort of lower the corporate shield at any opportunity that works for them. And commercial landlords are the same way. They'll let you sign in your entity's name because that's whose name is going to appear on the bill, but they want your personal guarantee too.
Yeah, but you can negotiate that if you know what you're talking about, knowing what you're doing.
Absolutely. If you know it can be negotiated. And
that's right.
And that's what I see happen so often is people just don't know. They're told, and now you sign here, and they do, just like you said.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that, I signed a franchise is on my side, which from what I hear from you, then it's not necessarily the case. It's on the side of them becoming successful, not necessarily you.
A franchise should be thought about like an additional layer of government. Okay. Because once you're in bed with them, they get to tell you what to do. They make their rules, right? And their earnings, what you pay to the franchisor, is actually, it's like sales tax versus income tax. The royalty is based on sales, not on your profit. So you could be operating and be losing money and still owe royalty fees.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? And they're collecting royalty payments from you, even though you're not making any money. And, the other thing, unfortunately, that I've seen franchisors frustrate the sale of locations. Because if you're a very successful operator and you're earning good money and you have high sales and you're really performing well, they're going to worry that the next operator may not perform to your level. And so it's actually not in their best interest to allow you to sell the business. And so I had one instance where it was a restaurant franchise, and my client had 2 units that were outperforming all the rest in the neighboring area, probably about 30 or 40%.
Wow.
He wanted to sell. He wanted to get out. And they denied the first 3 applicants who tried to buy.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. It ended up dragging along for another year more than it probably could have.
Wow.
Goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of good things to think about.
Is there opportunities in franchises that you would suggest someone buy one?
I would. And franchises can be great for people that don't necessarily need to be creative in their business. So they're going to provide that framework of this is how we do it, and it's going to be consistent with other locations. And franchises can provide things that independent businesses often can't do on their own very well. So if you think about restaurant chains, you know, seasonal promotions, special meals, special recipes for different times a year, and all the ad campaign that goes with that. Well, at the head office of the franchisor, they should be working on that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And it's really hard for an independent person to do that and do it well. And so what I always say is look at what money goes up to them and what they're doing for the franchisees. And you have to assess, is there really enough value here for what money I would have to pay? And at the end of the day, starting any business is really risky. That's why I tell people not to. Buy a business. And if you think a franchise is better for you, buy an existing franchise location, because then you can actually look at the performance of that location and determine if it's going to meet your criteria. And then you will also get all the benefits that the franchise company likes to talk about, right? Just be careful, because once you start talking to the franchisor, here's another thing I'm seeing again and again, is they'll sometimes try to dissuade you from buying that location. They'll say, oh, you want to buy one? You want to buy one of our businesses? Well, you know, that one's been around for a while. It may have some problems. We could set you up in a new location over here, because that's always their best interest. Their best interest is always in growing the number of units over seeing them turn over.
Wow.
Boy, this is good advice. This is such good advice. Hey, okay, so we're talking to David C. Barnett, and he's telling us all the good stuff about buying businesses, selling businesses, franchise businesses, you name it. And he's everywhere. He has over 300 videos on YouTube. He has books galore on Amazon. He's got a great blog where you go to www.investlocalbook.com. So just wanted to let you guys know it's David Barnett that we're talking to. And we're here kind of at the end of the show, so we only have like a couple more questions to give him. And I know Brian, I can tell he's got them. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to hear about your new book, and I want you to kind of tell us more about what you're coming out with.
Well, it's funny because it's almost like I set you up there, because the new book is called Smarter Than a Startup. And the reason why I wrote it is because there's just so much out there about this startup culture, about this idea that we're going to start a business and we're going to work 80 hours a week and we're going to get an office with a pool table because that's cool. And we're just going to work like crazy. And if it doesn't work, we're going to pivot, because that's a new word we just learned. And we're going to make it work, and then we're going to...
That word has been out since Ross Geller was trying to get a couch up the stairs with his friends. Remember on Friends? Pivot!
Well, that's for basketball, right?
Okay.
You got to plant your foot and spin around.
Okay, so even older than that.
So it's called Smarter Than a Startup. And so in the book, I say, look, if you really have this new idea that nobody's ever seen and you want to launch this business and you think it's great, instead of starting one from scratch, build your business from within an already profitable enterprise. So here's the model. You know, a big company like Google, if they decide, oh, there's a new idea, let's try it out. They're going to take some people, they're going to put them in a corner. They're going to say, try this out. And meanwhile, they're still selling Google ads. They've got their cash flow flowing. Everyone's being paid. They're making money. And if those guys fail, oh, well, we'll just bring them back in the fold and put them into some other department. Right. Yeah. And so a business that has already got a cash flow flowing is the perfect place to build a new startup, not in isolation. Because of course, what happens is if you don't get enough customers and sales, you end up running out of runway. I love how they take the words from everywhere else. So you run out of runway and then you crash into the grass or whatever's at the end. Right. So that's what's Smarter Than a Startup is all about.
Okay. That's very cool. Good. What if someone doesn't have a business at all and they want to start their own business? Are you suggesting maybe buying their business and then doing the startup?
Well, that's exactly it. That's what the book describes. Yeah. So you go looking for a business that has similar resources already in place to what you are going to need for your new venture. Okay. And then you can actually, you know, you're sharing. You don't even have to make new investments some of the time if you can reuse some of the assets within that business.
That's very interesting. I'm going to have to find that book when it comes out. And when is it being released?
End of October, and the pre-sale is up already on Amazon.
Okay, perfect. So you can buy it now on Amazon. We'll hit the link and put it up on this video. And you guys can go grab it now. And of course, when it's released as well, if you're viewing it after it's been released.
Yeah, makes a great Christmas gift. And it'll come out like right in time.
There you go.
Okay, guys. Well, we're going to be wrapping it up. I want to thank you so much, David. And this is David Barnett, for being with us. He is, go to his blog, investlocalbook.com, go on to amazon.com and look for David Barnett. He has some of the Amazon bestsellers and his newest book that's on pre-sale. And just thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. And look up David C. Barnett, because there's like a zombie fiction author with my same name, and it's not me.
Don't go to the zombies.
Okay. All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much, David. It's been great speaking with you, and you've just been a wealth of knowledge. And I've taken some notes from what you told me, and a lot of stuff I didn't even think of even asking. It's been great. So I appreciate you being here.
Cool.
Tammy,
I've had a lot of fun.
Take it away, ma'am.
All right. Thanks again, David. It's been awesome talking to you, and Jennifer and Brian, thank you so much for hosting today. And if you do have any questions for David, I will have all of his information in the show notes for you. So I'll also have the link for his new book, so you can get that starting at the end of October, and he's got the pre-sale going on now. If you have any questions for David that you would like me to ask him or pass on any information to him, please email me at Tammy, Tammy, at leafylegalservices.com. So if you have any shout outs that you would like me to relay on our next podcast episode, also feel free to email me. And if you know any other guests that you would like us to join us on the show, please email me. And thank you again, everyone, for listening. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, everywhere. And we really appreciate if you'd leave us a comment and a like for our episode. So we'll see you next time. Have a great day.
Attention real estate investors and entrepreneurs. Did you know that real estate investors are a primary target for lawsuits? According to the National Survey of the Court data, 25% of Americans risk being sued in their lifetime. However, if you are a real estate investor, you have a 95% chance of being sued in the next 20 years. Leafy Legal Services helps you protect your assets and strategically grow your business and wealth. Leafy Legal Services are experts at the Series LLC and Delaware Statutory Trust, two of the newest and most ideal legal structures for real estate investors. Leafy Legal Services have the most personalized and affordable solutions for setting up LLCs. Property owners are always at risk when it comes to their assets. Anonymity is so important. If you own just a rental house and you own your home, you have to protect yourself and your properties from any potential legal issues. Leafy Legal Services have the right solutions to make sure you are happy and feel secure. They offer cost-effective documentation that suits their clients' needs. For a free consultation and ebook, visit leafylegalservices.com. They are waiting to hear from you. leafylegalservices.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.